Hello and welcome everybody to another episode, another week with BEARSKIFILM. Tonight we're joined by a really cool guest, Brad from Unbearable Sports. If you guys have not checked out his YouTube channel, definitely check it out. He's got a lot of great content. And how you doing tonight, Brad?
You know, I'm hanging in there like the rest of us Bears fans, right? So it's unfortunate, but yeah, we'll get it out, talk some sports, talk some Bears. But yeah, thankful to be on this show. So thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And man, it's just a week filled with such high emotion, and it it's amazing how quickly this thing has gone so sour, and it's all over the place. And I mean, I was kind of going through it, and it's just at every level there is fault. Starting with Caleb Williams, missing some easy throws, just being inaccurate when the opportunities for easy plays are there, which haven't been a lot, but sometimes they do try and do something for him to help him out a little bit. He has not executed. And so then you look at Shane Waldron not making it easy enough, consistently enough to groom a rookie quarterback, and just not putting together a good game plan, not having any kind of rhythm in play calling or anything. And then you look at Matt Eberflus, who had Luke Getsy here for 2 years and went out and decided to get Shane Waldron. And ultimately, it falls on him as the head coach for all those things. And then you look at Ryan Poles for sitting there during the offseason and not even interviewing another head coach, as if there's no better option out there than Matt Eberflus. And then, although I don't like to go here much, then you look at ownership and you go, okay, and we're also too cheap to fire this guy because we'd have to pay him while we still pay another coach. And so it's just remarkable how at every step of the way there's bad issues.
And the stories that are coming out too about the whole like 4 years or 5 years for Matt Eberflus, I think that's something that's like 5 years you give to a proven head coach. And it sounds like from based on the stories from like Brad Biggs, Adam Rank, they're saying that Flus might actually have 5 years rather than the typical four, which maybe it's because they knew that they were going to be blowing things up year one, but still doesn't make much sense. And like to your point, Paul, you're a billion-dollar organization, what, 5 billion or whatever it is, you can afford that, right? Like that's the big thing that's frustrating. You're a billion-dollar org. You got to make the right moves and you have to keep on moving on. And also too, they need a new pro scouting department because Shane Waldron, why didn't we know more about like his actual personality before hiring him? Same thing with like a Nate Davis, simple pro development, pro scouting that we just didn't do with some of these people.
Brad, I actually texted David the other day and I said, do you know what Mike Vrabel said when they got rid of Nate Davis?
Yeah.
We want guys that practice.
Yep.
There was your evaluation right there. I don't know. David?
No, I mean, I agree with all your guys' points, and I can get into more details on how I personally feel and stuff. But yeah, the facts are the facts. Ironically enough, if I'm not dead on this, I know it's in there, like top 3, top 4 per person in terms of staff members. The Chicago Bears have one of the largest front office staffs in the NFL. So I don't know the exact number or anything like that, but I remember listening to an anecdotal podcast comment from two of the guys that I really like and like to listen to and respect, Hogan Johns, and they were talking about how walking through Hallis Hall is like, it's awkward. It's almost weird how many staff members you pass just like walking back on a day-to-day basis. They have, a person for cleats, a person for the shoe that goes on the cleats, and then the laces, like a third person to lace the cleats. And then it's just kind of this. So everything is ass backwards.
And then one to manage all three, right?
And then there's a guy to inspect the cleats after they've been laced by the first 3 guys, And then so part of that, I think, goes into all the things that just piss me off today tremendously. I'm ebbing and flowing between apathy and pure rage. And if you know anything about me as a sports fan, like I'm ready. If it wasn't for this YouTube channel, I probably wouldn't watch a single game the rest of the year. I do feel like part of my fandom now has been attached to this investment of time and my love for us doing this on a week-to-week basis. But I've boycotted Chicago Bulls basketball for 5-7 years. I've boycotted the Bears for 2 to 3 years at a time. I still know what's going on in the background, but I'm dangerously close. And part of that makes me mad about what Brad brought up is, for $1 billion organization to have such a staff, right, to hire so many people, but to still penny pinch when it comes down to, it's not like you're doing this all the time. It's not like you're firing coaches left and right. David Tepper is paying for, and if I'm not wrong, I'm close, it's 3 or 4 head coaches simultaneously, especially if he goes into this year. Or the Raiders right now are paying for 3 coaches simultaneously at the same time. So as much as those organizations aren't necessarily something to model yourself after, at least they're trying. At least they're doing something. And it's not like the Bears are one of the teams in history, never ever done it before. It's not like you're doing this hand over fist and wasting millions of dollars. Do it one time and maybe it'll work out. You can't keep saying this won't work or make you better if you don't even try. And that's part of why I'm just so angry today.
Well, you mentioned like good organizations. And one thing I always like to do on my show is kind of bring it back to like the real world, like us regular people that have to work normal jobs and stuff like that, where when you think about like some of the best leaders that you might have worked with and or higher ups and other things like that, they usually ask, well, there's one guy that comes to mind that kept on saying, he's like, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And like would keep asking that because as a leader, you're supposed to understand the big picture. You're not supposed to get involved with like emotions and stuff like that. But what's the big picture? And Paul, you kind of mentioned a little bit on this too, where Caleb hasn't been doing well. Well, also the wide receivers haven't been getting open, right? And the offensive line, the play calling, the defense can't stop anybody running the football. There's like 6 different problems. But also, when you have something like that, then it goes into, well, what might be causing some of this and what might be the first problem we have to solve? And right now, it's the morale. It's people giving up on this team, not wanting to be there. And if you have a problem with people not wanting to show up for work, Nate Davis, and other things like that, to me, it boils down to the coaching staff. And I'm not a fan of firing the coaches left and right and other things like that. But this is a scenario where it makes a lot of sense, especially when you have Brown, who could easily step into an offensive coordinator spot because he's done it before at Carolina. You also have Washington, who's already your defensive coordinator, and also Hightower. During the offseason, he was a head coach for the Shrine Bowl and has aspirations. Like when I was listening to, you mentioned Hogue interviewed him and was talking about like, yeah, I'd like to be a head coach someday. You have the interim pieces there. And it seems like everybody is frustrated at Flus, like giving up on Flus and giving up on our offensive coordinator. So why not? Why not try and change the morale and try to get people to actually believe in this team?
And and there's a root cause to that. I mean, we all know it. It's 4 major collapses. I mean, you have 4 games where you had a 95% chance or higher to win in the fourth quarter, and time after time again, you failed, and you failed. And I take it back to last year. I believe after the second one, because the first one was, I believe, the Broncos. The second one was the Lions. After that one, I was like, I'd be done. As a player, I'd be done. And credit to them, they weren't. They still kept going. But then, you had that terrible game, I believe, against the Browns where it came down to a Hail Mary that you didn't get, right? Or you came a yard short. Like you've had all these just terrible, terrible losses and collapses. And here we go again this year, and it roars its ugly head back in. And this year, all it took was one. All it took was that Washington game for these guys to just be like, that's it.
Well, like Brad said, and then the morale, because Paulie, you and I, literally right after Washington, we called each other, and I'm like, man, I can't fathom how you as a player can come back the next week and keep playing hard and stuff like that. And the only reason I wasn't brave enough to make that statement, like on the shows or publicly, or just kind of saying it more with like chest out, was because I said I've said this 4 times before. I've said this every time they did this. And I was like, I can't fathom being a fan and seeing this and doing this, or being a player and seeing this and coming out the next week and playing hard for this coach. And yeah, this had to be the one that broke the camel's back. And I was saying it to Paulie for Arizona. Like, there's no way. It can't happen again. They can't come out again. But I haven't been proven right yet. I've been proven wrong every time. This one had to be the straw that broke the camel's back. It after a while it adds up, and part of it was, I think, going back to our collective thought on this is we said that, while your players are young and while they're being molded and while they'll believe anything, you can get away with this rah bullshit and you can kind of blame the kids for it, because that's what college coaches do, right? They blame the kids and they know best, and that's why these guys come into the NFL, these college coaches, and they fail catastrophically because they can't point fingers anymore. They have to they have to self-own and self-scout a little bit and do stuff like that. And when Matt Eberflus got hired, we were talking about the hits principle and how it's a cute little gimmick and stuff like that. But these guys became pros over the last 2-3 years while Matt Eberflus was still staying in the same place. So you hired this guy who was a decent coach to get you through the hard times, who can mold some young players. And then now these are professionals and they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for 3-4 years since you've been here. And they don't buy your bullshit anymore. You got Jaquan Brisker coming out on Twitter today. Forget the exact thing he tweeted, but something along the lines of, if you keep trying the same shit, you're going to get the same result, or something along those lines. And so that's what you're having right now. You got these pros who are fed up. And like Brad said, with morale, I think that's the only, because you're naming these areas, right? Offensive line, quarterback. What's the one thing you can do to kind of trickle in a little bit of sauce into all those areas? As a manager, you can improve the joy, the morale. You can't fix each problem individually.
Dave, the rookie QB is fed up.
Yeah.
Not even the pros. The rookie quarterback is
well, that's
fed
because
up.
he's probably ahead of his schedule, right? Like, he is a mature person who's eye rolling already at Shane Waldron 9 games in, going like, dude, you don't know what the fuck you're talking
because
about.
3 games in, he was running to the sideline, chewing him out for not getting the plane fast enough. Right? Yeah. Like Brad, I'm gonna let you respond here in a second, just to give you a little bit of background. David and I know each other through work. I used to be his manager. You used to be an employee under me, and I'm totally fine with being Michael Scott from The Office. You guys want to just have fun and let this thing ride? Sure. But it's really truly your employees that kind of sometimes set the expectation for you of, hey, are we taking this serious or are we not? Like, you know what I mean? And then from a point of management, in my opinion, it's important to listen and kind of respond in that manner. And so, seeing Caleb do that, it's like, okay, but then, at the same time, these guys have been in football their whole lives.
And you
so
talk
they
about
should be setting the expectations high. Like, it should be set.
And like what Dave said, like, they're professionals, and it's like kind of that whole manager aspect, like the whole new wave of management is like empathy and like being like, yeah, you know what? I got it wrong. And I think about like Mike McDaniel, the Miami coach. You hear all of his mic'd up moments where he's like, yeah, sorry about that, too, a bad play. And just kind of moves on. And it's that the thing that I said that I got a little bit of flack. A couple of people didn't like it that I said this. I disagreed with the Tyreek Stevenson benching. Not saying he shouldn't have been disciplined, but why I disagreed was because the coaching staff did not take accountability for blatant mistakes that they made. And the players knew that. The players understood. But when you discipline a player, but you don't discipline yourself while everybody there, your employees, your players are not stupid. They know that you effed up. And the fact that they did not take accountability, then what was the first thing that Matt Eberflus said after they got whooped in for the Cardinals? He's like, this is all the coaching staff. And it's BS, because after this game, when he was asked about that, they're like, so what would you change? Just like everything could be better. And then you ask Caleb Williams and he's like, I could do this. I could do this. So it's just BS. And it's like, people can smell BS a mile away. And I think that's where everyone's given up, where you're not going to take accountability. So why should we? So
it's one of my least favorite societal kind of things going on right now is being so dead set or hardcore on your opinion and then hard overcorrecting when you're proven wrong instead of finding nuance or middle ground. And so that's what this is, right? Is like Matt Eberflus was just always in this hard this direction, and well, the players need to execute better and we need to look at the tape the next day. It's like, dude, do you not know what you saw yet? Like, you need a day or two to process. And then it's like, well, now it's like, you know what, it's all on me. Blame me first. And it's just this hard overcorrection that, just like you said, it's just so disingenuous and just not believable. And it's just, it's disgusting to watch. And that's why part of it is we can't even watch it. And imagine going to work and listening to someone try to motivate you and talk you into working harder now because you're
Michael
doing
Scott.
bad.
Imagine Michael Scott trying to tell you to work harder.
Yeah. It's wild.
So Brad, that's where you're completely right. And like, so although I was all for the Tyreek Stevenson benching, I also have a philosophy on how I would like my football team to be ran. So I get exactly what you're saying, because you've established 3 years of a certain way of doing things. And so you benching Tyreek Stevenson doesn't necessarily fit into that mold of what you've been doing. So I understand that. I prefer, even though this guy didn't have much success in the NFL, I prefer what Mike Singletary did. Went out right after the game and called out Vernon Davis. Can't win with him. Can't win. But he had established that he's a no bullshit kind of guy. And so what you're going to get from him is no bullshit. And like, you know, to not be able to process things in the moment, to need a day or 2 or 3 to reflect on it is damning to me. I mean, that is just, that's terrible. And, you know, I my father-in-law always likes to bring this up to me. He says he saw a video with Bill Belichick talking about him and Brady's relationship, and he'd be like, I'd see 3 to 4 different things on any given play. Brady would run to the sideline and name me 7 or 8 different things. So don't act like you can't learn from the player as the like there's clear communication there, and there's also respect for the talent, and you know what I mean? And then there's just a conversation, a decision, and execution. And it just seems like that is a mile away from what the Bears have going on.
And that's where it's like the players need to get better, right? Caleb has to perform better. Everybody has to perform better. But it's the same thing since the coaches aren't taking accountability, and you're fed up and you're giving up on the coaches. And then if someone comes in and be like, hey, yeah, if you could just be better at your job, that'd be great. Right? Like they
save
won't
my
want to
job,
do that.
and then we're all happy. And then, you know, like, and that's where I think that kind of comes in. We were kind of alluding to this, and that's part of one of my questions. And I guess I'll just kind of segue into it. Part of that problem and the whole reviewing tape for 2 days and this and that. One of my biggest things that I upset me today was when I texted Paul, I think around 10, saying like, hey, no one's been fired and I don't expect anybody to be fired. Paul pointed out the whole Dave Kaplan little mini fiasco that was there, which you can't convince me wasn't on purpose and totally staged. And it was literally him just going like, but
the paper to the phone.
Yeah,
I'm losing you. I'm losing
you in a tunnel. Oh, and so that's what that was.
The bees,
right?
The bees.
The bees are coming. And then the other part of it is the fact that you needed an extra hour and a half. You delayed your press conference an hour and a half, your typical Monday press conference. And that's what you fucking trot out? That bullshit is what you needed, the extra hour and a half? Forget the day. Forget the overnight part. That I can kind of fathom. Yeah, cool. Guess what? Sorry. You're having a bad fucking time. I know you want to go home after work on Sunday. You're coming into the office. If you're Ryan Poles, if you're George McCaskey, if you're Kevin Warren, if you're anybody who fucking matters, and you're saying, Matt, drive your ass back to Hallis Hall, and we're meeting right now, and it's 6:00, and you're going to miss dinner. We'll order takeout. And we're going to talk this out so that tomorrow morning we have a plan in place, because, and like how you guys kind of gave the parallels to work. And, you know, I always, certain times with my wife, like she knows football, she listens to us, but I'll kind of try to lay it out in a way of her job where I'm like, hey, you got to do this press release or something. And your current boss is a moron. And he's going, you know, I might be gone by Wednesday. I might not. So keep working on this press release the way I like it to be done. And then we'll see what happens Wednesday. And then Thursday, a new boss comes in and goes like, scrap that. It's due Saturday. Let's do it again. Stop wasting those 3 days. Why are we wasting Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday? This should have been immediate. This should have been concrete. It should have happened last night. The decision should have been made. What did you possibly gain in the extra couple hours this morning? It's literally just a bunch of dorks going like, let's sleep on it and see how we feel tomorrow. because it makes no sense. The choice should be obvious. So to delay what did you gain from an hour and a half delaying of a press conference? You are wasting so much time preparing for the Packers, which, let's be honest, I'll take my life savings and bet it on the Packers right now.
They're coming off a bye week too.
And that's exactly my point, is you're wasting precious hours that you don't have to prepare for the Packers, which George is going to be upset. Virginia is going to poop her diaper. Like, she's going to shit her diaper when she sees what the Packers do to the Bears this Sunday, because that, nothing upsets Virginia like a Packers beating, because that's really where our priorities are. While the Packers have been preparing for your dog shit performance for 2 weeks, they're probably done. They've been done 4 days ago. We don't need to see anymore. We don't need to study any harder, but they will be, because that's a good franchise. And that was one of the most, of all the micro and the macro of everything today, the extra hour and a half, as if you need it to figure, and then you still don't have an answer.
Well, David,
Shane's fired, but he's not fired, but he won't call plays, but he might call plays.
He was on the phone with T-Mobile trying to figure out his phone connection. Didn't you hear the Kaplan interview in the morning?
Yeah.
He had to do that. He was busy,
He probably did that to Ryan Poles. He saw the call from Ryan Poles and was like, I can't hear. He gets home, he's like, shit, I got a job for 24 more hours.
He's like, I'll just do the interview. I'll make something up. I'll say it's my decision to figure out what happens with Waldron, right? Yeah, I'll say that.
Yeah. Brad, one of the things that I was talking with David was, in my opinion, when it comes to head coaching impact, I think the most impactful times coming from the head coach position come when the team is either really bad or really good. And this all stemmed from somebody in a chat that I was participating in. I was watching some podcast. Somebody's like, well, you can't count the first year. You can't count that 3-14 season the first year. And I go, well, in that case, like I looked at Ryan Pace and I was like, Kevin White, okay, I'll give you a pass. But then after mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake, guess what? Kevin White now enters that conversation as the first mistake. So, like, to me, your job as a head coach, like the impact you have is to be able to elevate a shitty roster and have it overperform based off the lack of talent. And when your talent finally gets good enough and your team's a playoff worthy team, to take them over the top. But like this whole middle bullshit, a lot of coaches can do. You're relying on the talent, and the talent can get you in the middle, no problem. But you have shown to me from day one that you're not able to elevate poor talent. And so, like, people kept saying, hey, Eberflus, this good defensive guy. What was he before Montez Sweat? What was he after Montez Sweat gets hurt? All of a sudden, this defense doesn't look as good. Well, maybe it's because of Montez Sweat and the defensive line pressure that's actually creating opportunities for these guys. Don't act like you can't get another coach in here to get some production.
The parallel right now, sorry, Brad, to just kind of give you even a more accurate parallel. The parallel of what the year that Paulie's saying is wasted and doesn't count, the Broncos are doing it as we speak.
There you go.
They have $60-70 million in dead cap space with a rookie quarterback and a completely under-talented roster in the AFC West, where the Chargers are beasts, where the Chiefs are beasts, and they're 6-3,
competing
6-4, whatever it is, 5-4.
Yeah,
and
Brad,
they're over 500 team.
Well, it's the whole idea of, like you said, coaching, elevating the players that they have. And like, I actually think that Eberflus on the defense, because we had Alan Williams before, everything was terrible, and then things started getting better. And I heard a non-Bears podcast kind of talk about this, where they're like, the Bears defense should not be this good still this year. But then all of a sudden, everything started coming apart. And that's where, too, like, when you talk about the same old, we've already seen this. Like, if Shane Waldron is going to be the GOAT, like the scapegoat that they throw everything on, we saw this, 6 months ago, 7 months ago, when we got rid of Luke Getsy, and that was the only, like, the offense was the only thing that we did. So are we going to do that whole thing, that whole song and dance again? And that's where you just need to try something different, because to the point of, like, people know that this is not going to end well. And if you just get rid of one of the managers, but the director, the person in charge that's still calling the shots is still there, people are going to be like, okay, what is this then? So you're just going to get rid of them. This is just the same exact stuff that's going over and over and over again. and no one's really going to want to play. And you have to do something for Caleb Williams. You really have to do something for him just so that this isn't a complete loss and he's just frustrated and he doesn't want to be here.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you're going to get him to just develop bad habits and get used to them. And you're just going to sit here and destroy another quarterback. I mean, you are. And part of the conversation of who to get as offensive coordinator during the offseason, me and David were saying, okay, well, a guy like Cliff Kingsbury's out there. But you won't make that move because he has had coaching experience. It now threatens your position. If you get into a part of the season where you're not doing well and your head's on the chopping block, guess what? There's a guy behind you that can obviously take your place. However, as a head coach, that shouldn't be your thought process or your concern. It should be, let's get every damn good experienced coach in here to make this thing work and work right. The best teams, like, you could point to the Chiefs. Andy Reid's in charge of the offense. Their defensive coordinator was a head coach. I mean, the guy's experienced. He's good. He knows what he's doing. You know what I mean? And so you can't sit there and let fear and desperation dictate the personnel moves you make like that. And yeah, it sucks constantly trying this like next up and coming thing, trying to make names out of guys. Meanwhile, you as a head coach aren't even established. Like, you're trying to create a coaching tree out of nowhere. Meanwhile, you've done nothing yourself. And I don't know, it kind of drives me nuts. And at the same time, it's like we look at what the potential future candidates are. And so, like, the only experimental guy I would want or even entertain would be Ben Johnson, just because it might be like a Kyle Shanahan situation where when he left the Falcons, he took all the success really with him because you just saw that this guy's a good coach. But even that scares me a little bit because it's still an experimental thing. Like, I'm so tempted to just be like, dude, just go get a guy that's done it. Even like a Mike Vrabel or somebody out there that can bring in a staff here with him. But the guy that should have been Jim Harbaugh last year. It really should have.
Yeah, I think when I look at like the coaching candidates, it's like, yeah, Ben Johnson, but not I do not want another defensive person. Like, because exactly what you talked about, Paul. A lot of them, you can get these like old defensive coordinators. Well, that's what's going to happen to Eberflus. After he's gone, someone's going to have Eberflus as their DC for however long. And you see that, like Vic Fangio, right after he had his shot at head coach. Staley, same thing, where these good defensive guys get one shot, then they're done. Then after that, the other thing too is like Ben Johnson. When I was going through offensive coordinators, like who could the Bears get? The thing that really stuck out to me is when you look at play calling EPA, right? What play callers give you a better chance to win? They're all the top 10 are head coaches besides Ben Johnson. And who was like one of the only offensive coordinators that was going to get an offensive coordinator job was I was going to say Luke Getsy, was Shane Waldron, because they don't become available for offensive coordinator because they go to head coaches. And so that's where that's where I also like the idea of just firing them so that, it's not going to you don't get a head start on anything, but it's nice for like a Ben Johnson just to be like, okay, it's available. It's there. They officially moved on. So yeah, I don't know your take, Dave.
No, David, you brought that exact point up to me before.
Which part?
That you almost have to have an offensive guy as your head coach because if you have a defensive guy, go ahead and explain that whole process. Yeah.
Well, that's just kind of one of those things that I'm sure Brad understands already in the last like 10 years, that the majority of the successful NFL head coaches have to be offensive play callers and or offensive coordinators, because if you have a defensive minded head coach and they are incredibly successful on offense, more than likely within 2 to 3 years of their success, they're going to be poached by some other team as the new head coach for them. So then you turn into this revolving door of, well, you can leave, but don't take too much of your staff with you because we want to maintain some consistency here, which is unrealistic. The NFL, the new head coach is going to take most of his staff with him. And then you're stuck holding the bag with this defensive guy and hoping that you can hire a new offensive coordinator. And that's what you see with teams like, I don't know, like the Steelers, for even example, where, they're hiring this guy and then they're firing this guy, Matt Canada. Now they're hoping that Arthur Smith can have a new career revival kind of thing. And it's it works, it's fine, but you're never going to see anything innovative. You're never going to see anything creative or revolutionary, especially when you have like young quarterbacks that you can kind of pair up with them and start figuring these kind of new and interesting things out.
The Steelers is a good point, just because I know Tomlin typically comes up as like the morale head coach and stuff like that. But to your point, it's like, yeah, the offense has been like something that the Steelers fans have hated
It
for all
holds them
these
back
years.
for years. Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's the
like,
thing that holds them back.
I'm curious about the Lions too. It's like everybody's like, well, we need like a Dan Campbell. It's like there's only one Dan Campbell. And also, I'm really curious to see what happens to the Lions next year without Ben Johnson, because everything points to Ben Johnson being this unbelievable offensive mind. Now, there's more to being a head coach than just being an offensive mind, but yeah, I love the idea of him potentially being here. But yeah, it's like you can't just to bank on that would be difficult. But to your point, Paul, Harbaugh was right there for the taking. But yeah, he's too alpha. He's too aggressive for the McCaskies.
And that's kind of where even Brad Johnson. Brad Johnson scares me sometimes, where he already kind of had that recent press conference quote that went viral where he's going like, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to continue to call plays. Right. And that's a good thing, I suppose, but it can also be kind of a negative thing, right? Because if you're too preoccupied, then you need to pair Brad Johnson with like Robert Saleh or Mike Vrabel or somebody, and you need to be comfortable enough with having these alpha guys walk in this room, each be responsible, but also respectful for their own, situations and their own, responsibilities and things like that. So yeah, that's why Brad Johnson scares me, because
Ben
you don't
Johnson.
know. I'm sorry. I keep looking at Brad and I see Brad Johnson. Ben Johnson scares me because, yeah, there's a very distinct possibility he could be the next Matt Nagy, where he is this offensive coordinator. I'm sorry. Like, you take an under-talented roster. One of the things that is carrying Detroit over the hump and allows Ben Johnson to do all these ridiculously cool things is because they're absurdly talented. And they can do, double pass reverses with linemen that have been there and established for 2 years. You can't bring that in and do this next year. You can't bring that over here and just start fixing that. I don't care how many linemen you draft or how many free agents you sign or how many, quarterbacks, coaches you turn into your offensive coordinators. You can't come in here and expect that to work. You need to have a fundamental understanding of establishing an identity of what to do with this culture, what this team's complementary football style is going to be. See what talent you have, what things you need to change. And you can't do that overnight, even if you are Ben Johnson and you are immensely intelligent on the offensive side.
And for those that are watching on YouTube, you probably saw my eyes going all over the place because I had to pull up this quote because, Dave, you reminded me of this, where Kevin Fishbain from The Athletic tweeted this out, where Sando from the NFL, he put together a New York Times article where just basically saying that about the Bears, where the GM won't want to fire the coach unless the president is on board with that, and the president is not going to turn the reins over to a proven coach. And then execs around the league think a Bears structure featuring an empowerment, engaged team president Kevin Warren all but rules out the possibility Chicago would seek established power coaches. So kind of goes to that whole thing of like, because they're saying that executives think because of Kevin Warren and just how the Bears are, that they wouldn't go after one of these powerful coaches, like the dominant voices in the room. But it's like, yeah, you can't just have all these soft-spoken people. Like, I always thought that Matt Eberflus looked like a preacher that you would have, where just kind of this laid-back dude. But yeah, it's frustrating.
This is a sorry, Paulie, go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to say one more thing about Matt Eberflus. David, I'll let you respond, and then we'll go up to the next level and talk about Ryan Poles, because I like how we're actually just going through from bottom to top. And I know Dave's got a lot to say about the very top too. So with Matt Eberflus, it's interesting. So we kind of went back and forth on this, me and David, and I had to look it up because Ryan Poles was hired, and then 2 days later, he hired Matt Eberflus. However, when he was hired, he was able to interview the second round of candidates, meaning the first round of candidates had already been kind of sifted through. And those three guys were Matt Eberflus, Dan Quinn, man, I forget the last one.
Defense coordinator, Baltimore Ravens.
Mike McDaniel.
No,
Michael something though.
no, it's a older, soft-spoken guy. I'll get it for you,
Polls
Paulie.
head coaching interviews. Yeah. So it's just funny because so he got to choose between those three guys, and essentially picked Matt Eberflus, right? However, what they were saying is Matt Eberflus,
Jim Caldwell.
Jim Caldwell. There you
yeah.
go, Matt Eberflus. And I remember at that time actually wanting Dan Quinn due to the experience. I was like, he's not the best guy out there. He's been in a Super Bowl though. Like, just get me the guy that kind of just knows what he's doing. But that's another topic, right? So Matt Eberflus, though, I believe the Colts were about to fire him.
Yep.
I don't think he was about to get retained by the Colts. He's about to just be let go for anybody to be able to, take him as a defensive coordinator or whatever. And here we are giving him a promotion. That
sounds eerily similar to a Waldron situation, doesn't it?
Pretty much. So, like, you're kind of seeing that same thing repeat.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who, because I heard that from it's from I listened to the Bet the Board podcast. It's Pain Insider and I forgot the other person, but they're very plugged in people. They actually were the ones that brought up Chris Jones, like polls calling for Chris Jones during the trade deadline. But yeah, they said they had very plugged in people that in the Colts organization that were saying, yeah, Flus was going to be fired. Instead, the Bears were like, yeah, we want him as head coach. And they're like, okay, yeah, here you go. Here you go. You can talk to him. So, yeah.
And so that just kind of, now, David, did you want to speak on the coaching level anymore? Or you want to take a step up to the GM? I know you had
I just think I do have in terms of, and this can be brought up right after Poll's conversation or even at the top of this, but I had a question for you guys in terms of like the percentages of blame to kind of pass around here, right? And in my mind, it's like the percent, if there's 100% chunk, right? Maybe this isn't, Paul, you rolled your eyes. Maybe this isn't a fun thought.
No, it's interesting. I like it because,
but like, to me, the players get 5 to 10.
And David, and usually I blame the players the most. And that's why I kind of shook my head because it's like, man, this is totally against what I'm usually about. When you initially asked it, I was like, oh man, I usually want to blame the players the most.
Yeah, for me,
but in this situation, I can't.
5 to 10. And then part of me is like, well, I want to blame Waldron a lot. But part of me also just sees the similarities between just the disjointed nature. And like, depending on who we've had on the show, Brad, and you're one of our many guests that like kind of depends on your opinion. I was livid about some of the offensive play calling and how people are blaming Shane Waldron for speed options or fullback dives to Doug Kramer. I'm sorry, if you're a head coach with any merit, any sauce in your body, you hear that play call and you go, what the fuck are you talking about? Timeout. Like, that's not what that's not what we've discussed. You do have a certain amount of allowance as Shane Waldron based on what you discussed with Matt Eberflus. And if Matt Eberflus's job in terms of the offensive side of it is just to say, hey, Shane, I have full trust in you, that's a problem too.
Yeah, and we talked about this, David. We talked about this during the offseason. How we're going to need Shane Waldron to come in here and be the hero of the day. Because at the end of the day, like, okay, so Ben Johnson wants to call plays, and we've seen the whole thing where, like, you're too much of an offensive coordinator and not a head coach. However, the defense is a lot easier to figure out. You still had Vic Fangio here, right? We have a defensive coordinator as a head coach, and it feels like he's got no input on the offense. And we saw that based off the offense changing from Getsy to Waldron. And it is like, I trust you completely. And in that case, like, what are we doing? You've been in football your whole life. You have these guys out there that are special teams coaches that come in. Why? Because they have an established philosophy on defense and on offense. And they're just going to get guys to sit there and run their philosophy, run their plays. Eberflus doesn't have it.
But part of that problem too is that Matt Eberflus this summer was just so excited to talk about how much input he's going to have in the offensive room and helping Caleb Williams and how much he's going to teach him about offense by teaching him about defense and this and that. And he actually came out and that was one of his like big summertime talking points. He said hair and offensive involvement, right? And then, but this is what comes out of it is these two offenses that look extraordinarily similar, right? Like two totally different play callers, two totally different systems, but we have two guys running the same route to the same part of the field. How that fucking happens with two different guys with two different philosophies is beyond me. It has to devolve or be part of that chunk of the percentage of blame to Matt Eberflus when he goes over the tape, because he goes over the tape for 2 straight days. He needs to go, what the fuck was this, Shane? This is not acceptable. I should never see this route or this play ever again.
Brad, I don't want to keep talking over you. So,
yeah. Oh, no worries. I was just going to say, like, I think exactly what you're talking about, Dave, where the whole self-scouting, where you need to be able to be on the defensive side and look, because the Patriots were saying, we saw the tells. Our defensive staff said that the Bears are going to do this, the Bears are going to do that. And there's times like I'm going to review the All 22 tape right after this. And like when we go through it, there's so many different plays that you just go, oh, they're probably going to do this, right? They always do the corner they always do a corner followed by another little out route right there. They consistently do stuff like that. And it's predictable, but also there's a fine line between crazy and genius, right? It depends on what someone's perception is of you. And Shane Waldron loves to be this mad scientist of play development. Like he likes to create these weird designs. And to some people, that's a genius move. But right now, everyone in the Bears locker room is going, nah, you're just crazy right now coming up with these different designs. And if they're not bought in, then that's where it's, you're not this genius of an innovator now. Now you're this crazy person coming up with all these insane, weird plays that just people don't want it to work. So it just simply doesn't work. But
I think Brad kind of like, he literally mid-sentence, I had this epiphanal moment of like, why does not only this offense not work, it's why are all the players so demotivated running routes? Because, and I saw this on Twitter yesterday too, where there's no purpose behind his play calling. There's none. There's no identity to it. That's a given, but there's no purpose behind it. We're not setting something up to set the next thing up. We're not doing something to create something else. It's just literally, I think it's like he hit like Madden choose, flipped through a few pages and just said, fuck it, let's run that one.
Yeah, there's
and
still
that's
no
what
identity.
happens where, and that's what happens when a player is just going like, this fucking play again, I'm going to run this shit half-assed because I know it's not coming to me. And I know that it's not going to matter because this is a stupid fucking play and I'm about to run a stupid fucking route.
Guys, I want to, yep, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah.
Oh, I was say one of the things, when you talk about developing and like having that entire play call, right? We know that the Bears wanted to run the ball, right? We also had the lowest amount of play action out of any team last week. So the whole thing of like developing the run and then running a play action, one could say, well, yeah, they have some blitzes, but if you're supposed to keep them honest and you're not even running a play action or anything like that, there's that idea of that he doesn't set up his plays where even the week before he ran this one look and then the very next play ran the exact same look doing the actual end around and they just stopped the end around. They're like, okay, that's something that you should have called later on in the game. And he doesn't understand the concept of the game management. It feels like he just wants to have his little Madden create a play, create that and be like, oh, this might be able to work. And when the blitz comes, there's no hot receiver. There's nothing like that he can have because everyone's backs are turned because they're running deep routes on 3rd and 4 when they're sending a blitz.
Yeah. And so, it's damning. I wanted to share this little video with you guys that we actually made last year. I forget exactly after which game it was, but Brad, I'm gonna have to just take you off the screen so it looks a little bit better. But guys, check this video out.
Players, it was a good call by the whoever this coordinator was. And that would be me.
Did you hear that? Let me just replay that really quickly. Let me just replay.
It's a good call by the whoever this coordinator was. And that would be me. And
you stood up there all year and pointed a finger at the players on the execution. In the beginning of the year, I was with that. I was saying, yes, the players need to execute better. It seems like this guy is happier about having a good week of practice than the result of a game. And then to sit there and credit yourself like that. I mean, to whoever that coordinator was, by the way, that would be me. You got to be kidding.
Yeah.
And when my jaw dropped, like, dude, you need to go. If you think that any of these players are going to play as hard as they did for you this last week after that coaching collapse at the end of that game, you're not going to get that kind of performance again all season from them. You're just not. And so, we asked for accountability. There it was.
Yep.
Right? I'm accountable for that success. And so, you have these damning things where it's like, okay, so now, we talked about Ben Johnson coming in here and calling plays, but then can you even be an offensive genius with this talent on the field? And I was part of the chat in one of the podcasts where somebody asked the question has Ryan Poles neglected the offensive line? And so I guess it's determined by what your definition of neglect is, because he has drafted 5 offensive linemen, right? One of them in the first round, Darnell Wright. One of them in the third round, Kieran Amagaji. And I believe you have Braxton Jones in the 5th. And then the other ones are, what's his name?
Kramer and Jatiri.
Kramer and Jatiri Carter. Exactly. Doug Kramer was in Jatiri Carter. So have you really neglected it? No. Have you invested well into it? No. You sat there. You haven't gotten a center. You've band-aided that over and over and over. So that's why I'm almost kind of leaning more towards just get somebody who knows what they're doing in here, because you're not at a point, we'd always talk about playing checkers before you play chess. You're not playing checkers yet. So to be trying to play chess with the talent on the field, you might get the same exact result. And so that you look at Ryan Poles and you start to criticize his team building philosophy, the way he approached it. We were big on trying to trade back in the draft from pick 9, getting a defensive end and getting a center. Why? Because that would be more impactful this year than wide receiver 3. It's not that I don't like Rome. I even, you said you got blasted for something you said. I said I wouldn't take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 9 because we're not in that position, and I got blasted for it. So I think it really falls on Ryan Poles as failing to build this thing. Guys, we were the best team of first overall pick quarterback had ever stepped into, right? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And then all of a sudden now we don't have that. Right. Now it's but I want to say this too, because I love what you said about that, because something that I'm trying to get to catch on is don't draft wide receivers high. And I mean this from the analytics perspective, because I was diving into it. It's the only high value position that you can get in later rounds besides round 1.
Pretty much.
We got to send Brad the link of
I'll send you a couple of links, man, where we do break it down as well. Top 10 wide receiver picks, you got to go back to Keenan Johnson, right?
No,
Keenan, what's his name?
For
the Jets. Keyshawn Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
96. He was the last top 10 wide receiver pick to win a Super Bowl. It wasn't with the team that even drafted him. But it's these guys over and over, it's a bad move. Even if they work out, it's just not a good team building move. You can find Antonio Brown in the 5th. You can find Tyreek Hill in the 5th. You can find Puka Nacua in the 5th. You can find Cooper Kupp in the 3rd. You can find these guys. Devontae Adams was a 2nd round pick. No, 1st round picks. Get a tackle, defensive end, defensive tackle. That's what should be.
That was the biggest thing, is that when you look at the premium position, when you look at who you have to draft in the 1st round, it's offensive tackles. The best offensive tackles come in the 1st round. Yeah, it's nice that you got Braxton Jones and stuff like that, but the next level people, they don't make people like that on earth. They don't make the defensive ends, the D tackles, because right now we're seeing the defensive tackle market. We can't do anything with it because everyone's signing those guys away. And so the top of the line people, you have to use those 1st round picks on D tackles, D ends, and offensive tackles and quarterbacks. That's what all the numbers show. Corners are around there, but it's real. But you can see what the corners go in the open market and how easily people are trading them for a 5th round pick, a 4th round pick. And yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of Rome, but it's one of those things where it's since everybody else really liked it, it's okay. I'm fine with it, but I love Jared Verse and I love Byron Murphy coming out. And those were my two darlings coming out. So,
dude, yeah, we should have had you on with us because you're like repeating everything that we had said in the past. But it's like damning because like during our live show during the draft, we drafted Rome and David was like, no, it's because it's nothing against Rome. It's everything against where you are. Like the first defensive player was taking a pick 16. You could have dropped back multiple spots and still had your pick of the litter at any defensive guy. And I said it at the time. You can't convince me that there isn't going to be one of these guys that pans out and makes a difference. And then go get yourself a center in round 2 because you need one.
With the value that pick was garnering at the time, I would venture to say you probably could have gotten down to 13, probably got the same year's second and maybe a 5th next year or something like that. And with that combination of players, you come out of that with Caleb Williams, Jared Verse, or like who you were saying, the defensive tackle from Texas, who I also love. Byron Murphy Jr., the 3rd or 2nd, whichever. And then Jackson Powers Johnson gets taken 44th overall. And I remember this specifically because I love Jackson Powers Johnson. And then I forget who the second favorite center was, Brad, if you are a draft guy.
Zach Frazier.
Zach Frazier is
my Steelers
now,
friend told me we got to steal with this kid, man.
And he is absolutely killing it. He's a borderline Pro Bowler on the Steelers this year. He's like entering that upper tier, upper echelon of like centers already. So you're pulling the words right out of our mouths. And just to address this comment real quick, Malik Neighbors is going to be a beast, though. I agree, Yada. How much you want to bet he's not re-signing with the Giants and he'll be a beast on some other team in 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, or like how much you want to bet that he's not going to get a Super Bowl ring
with the Giants because he won't matter.
Randy Moss does not have a Super Bowl ring, guys. Randy fucking
Terrell Owens?
Oh, New England? No.
Terrell Owens?
It's damning, man, because like those guys dictate money, man. And when you dictate finances, you dictate how your team's supposed to function. And you know what I mean? And it is a game of finances. That's why we also said, like, hey, you drafted 2 offensive guys, the top 10 picks. Okay, so that tells me at some point this year, you need to lean on the offense. That point should have been Arizona, in my opinion. That's where the defense started to give up more. And you should have been able to lean on your offense, and it was just an utter failure.
I mean, this kind of leans back into the percentage of blames. Dave loves Neighbors. I do like Malik Neighbors. But this is kind of the point of the team building aspect of it, right? Is okay, great. You have Rome Odunze, and he's been moderately healthy on the team this year, and it's been going pretty well for him in the sense of like, yeah, he doesn't look like a total bust, but he's not producing. However, now let's say you did draft a center and a defensive end, and you're going into next year, and all the same things are just happening right now, but you do have a center and a nice defensive end to go into the new head coaching saga or whatever. And guess what we could do with the 3rd or 2nd round pick and be just as excited for this draft? Grab another wide receiver, because you could have gone into this year and been pretty excited. But if you had a solid offensive line and you had a nice defensive end and that you could have gotten from this year, and you're going into this year's draft, we would have been just as excited with whoever we took in the 3rd round as we are with Rome Odunze. And now we're going into next year hoping that you can patchwork this with 2 to 3 brand new offensive linemen who are young and hopefully can mesh and gel. I would have rather have developed that chemistry this year, even through this shit, even through the struggles. And then next year, gotten a wide receiver that you could plug in, and then you could just say, hey, kid, just go catch some balls. Everything else has already been figured out for you.
And then Dave also made the point, like, right before the draft or during the draft, right after, I don't remember, but no, it was before. He said, well, okay, if you're taking Caleb Williams number 1, that's the gamble. Like, so these quarterbacks get good enough to where they make receivers out of no name. We kind of saw it with DeAndre Carter a little bit. Like, he had some chemistry with DeAndre Carter, more than he's had with Tyler Scott. You know, initially it was more than he had with Rome Odunze. And it's just like, okay, so like throughout the past, you have these guys that make wide receivers out of nothing. You see the Chiefs trading away Tyreek Hill, right? Because Patrick Mahomes is now good enough to sit there and elevate the rest of these guys. And so, you know, the way I like came to terms with it, it's like, okay, well, I guess you're trying to give them all the weapons so there's no excuse not to succeed. Oh yeah, but fuck the offensive line, right?
Yeah, I feel like he wants Rome to actually be the number 1 too, because like I feel with their chemistry right now,
probably should be right.
I think this is stuff that you can watch on any one of these quarterback channels, right? Like Tim Jenkins or Dan Orlovsky or anything like that. The misuse of positions and just basic concepts of fundamentals and receivers and all that. Rome Odunze is your X receiver 10 times out of 10. And he's not currently right now. Somebody did the analysis. He's not even in on 12 personnel. They're putting in Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. And Keenan Allen has his deepest targets per route this year than he ever has in his entire career in his prime. So they're asking a guy who is a over-the-middle merchant, a slot receiving merchant, a guy who is a 6-7 yards guaranteed to run 13 yards and be a jump ball receiver. When you have a guy on the fucking roster that is built to do that, and you're misusing everybody. It is a fundamental high school, college level of ineptitude that we're seeing right now in terms of like player usage, scheming, all that stuff. But that goes back to what we were talking about. And
Tyler Scott's a smaller guy. He's a speed guy that's supposed to be able to stretch the field. They're like schematically, there is definitely a spot where you can utilize that type of wide receiver.
Yeah. I just like with Scott, I don't see the wide receiver-ness out of him though. Like that's my thing, but it's the thing, like to Dave's point, we're not using the weapons we have, right? We have all these weapons, but to that point, I remember when Keenan was signed, looking at it, his production was going downhill when he was the X receiver until he was moved, like basically exclusively he was playing slot for the Chargers. And then, like that's a really good, I never really thought of it that way, Dave, where it's, they're putting him outside and it's like, why are you doing that? Like he literally was seeming like he was cooked when he was playing outside and it was found the life inside. But now, why not just, they're throwing him on the outside and everything like that. So, it's
so
frustrating.
To lead back into that conversation we were talking about this with and moving back into your point, like percentages of blame. And I know you're kind of, we were having it out a little bit yesterday where I said, well, if you don't want to blame the McCaskies, which is where we're going to eventually end up with me mostly doing that, then I said that you have to significantly change your tune. I did a whole episode week 2 or 3 about, are we sure Ryan Poles is good? Because I was sniffing this out a little bit. Paulie gave me a nice 45 minutes where I presented about 5 pages of notebook evidence where, other than the Carolina trade, Ryan Poles, his best skill as a GM is not drafting. It's not that good. His track record is not very good. It's using his up until this year, especially using his draft picks to pick up players in a trade. And this year particularly, it's going really, really poorly. But he, traded a 4th for Keenan Allen. I think on the surface, especially what you're seeing with what DeAndre Hopkins went for in the midseason, when you go into other areas, I think generally speaking, he does use his draft pick capital pretty well to get other players. But up until this year, it's not drafting players. He has hits and misses like Montez Sweat. For every Montez Sweat, there's a Chase Claypool. For every Keenan Allen, there's a Ryan Bates. That's probably the thing he's been the best at. And then in terms of fleecing the Panthers, that's what his career is going for. Right now, it's all kind of downhill and it's going worse. And so I told Paulie he better start changing to Ryan Poles might suck now. Because if you can't blame them Caskies, you need to really blame Ryan Poles, I would say.
And so, sorry, Brad, do you got something to comment on it?
First off, I was just going to say, what's up to Philip? How's it going? So I'm out there.
I waited to put that comment up. He put that in there a while ago, but I was like, we're going to get there. We're working our way up to the top. But it's a take that a lot of people agree with for sure.
The thing too, and what I feel like with Ryan Poles that I've consistently said is it's his signings of free agents that I don't agree with, where everybody's heard this, the low value positions, high value positions, who to sign, who not to sign. They trade away Roquan Smith and it's like, cool, we did that. And then we got TJ Edwards where it's like, awesome. We got him for like $6 million a year. This is pro masterclass GM. This is amazing. And then all of a sudden I get the pop-up of Bears just signed Tremaine Edmonds for $18 million a year. And I'm like, no, like why did we just do that? And then we sign DeAndre Swift, a running back to a large contract when we got rid of David Montgomery. So it's these things where I'm like, oh, he made the right decision at the beginning, but then he does these other things where you're like, okay. And we kind of talk about like the Nate Davis. Nate Davis as a player, he's been a good guard in the NFL. But if your whole thing is like the whole hits principle and stuff, and you didn't know that this guy doesn't practice, and what happened? He got his money and he's gone. Like he's not playing for you anymore. And the blatant lack of looking at the center position is something that drives me bonkers because you have like, and I said this when on my show consistently because people were like, we need offensive line. If you're someone that says that, ask yourself what position, because it's 5-card poker, right? If you have a bad hand, you can't just be like, man, I need more cards. It's like, no, what are you putting in? Because you can't swap people out like you do with defensive line. So my whole piece was you have Darnell right at right tackle, right? So you have him. Then you have Tevin Jenkins, who we all agree is good. You just need to have a backup that's there because he's guaranteed going to miss 5 games. And then Braxton Jones. What do you think of Braxton? Where they were hoping that he would at least turn into something. And then Nate Davis. What do you have with him? And it's up to them to identify what they're going to get out of Nate Davis. And then also the center, you didn't even add a center. You added a below average center, and he's giving you below average play. So that's something to me that the neglect for the center position, especially when you have a rookie quarterback. What are we seeing right now? In the first couple weeks, it wasn't like them getting beat. It was them not being in the right position, not having the right pass protection, being in the right area. What fixes that? A center, a really good center, which we just neglect to get. A Zach Frazier
and
fix a lot.
The damning thing is we go back to even Lucas Patrick. We're going to get this guy. Why? Because he's experienced with the scheme. We're going to get
placating
Shelton
to the offensive.
We're going to get Shelton. Why? Because he's experienced with the scheme. This scheme is what you're investing on.
Not only, Brad, did you not get
fail?
There were, I think, and I counted this over the summer because it pissed me off because I was like, we got to get one of them. I think there were 6 or 7 Pro Bowl or former Pro Bowl centers changing teams, kind of just doing this like center roulette, and a lot of them just swap places. And one of the ones that swapped places was Pro Bowl center Mitch Morse from the Buffalo Bills. And like you said, not only did you not get a center, you got a guard who played a few games at center, backing up who? Pro Bowl center Mitch Morse. And then you get his backup for draft capital when you could have just signed him. We say this word arrogance lately a lot. That is such an arrogant move to say, I know everyone's going out and getting these centers, but I know better. I'm going to get the backup to the guy who everyone else wants because I know he's going to be better than this guy. And then, like you said, pro scouting talent, he has arthritis. It's why he's been missing all these games. This isn't a shock to anybody. Arthritis doesn't pop up overnight. Ryan Bates has been dealing with an arthritic shoulder and elbow for years, and you go out and you spend draft capital on that guy because your ego probably did that because you tried to get him the year before, you couldn't get him, so now you're going to absolutely put the nail in that coffin.
Like, I like centers that play center, like that's call me crazy, but it's like that's my number one criteria. Lucas Patrick played majority at guard, and we're like, this is our center, even though he was a backup, but he was thrusted in because the Packers line was always banged up. So it's
one of the best Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Like,
yeah,
going to make your job a lot easier because
he gets the ball out. Yeah,
Aaron Rodgers back there. So yeah. And so like I said, I mentioned chess and checkers, and that comes from a quote that Yurko said on ESPN 1000. And he said, listen, as a lineman, when we get into a game, we start with checkers. If I could just physically manhandle you, we don't get to the whole hand fighting martial arts bullshit. I'm just going to grab you and throw you. And then go sack your quarterback. And you're totally seeing it with Coleman Shelton. He's undersized. He gets tossed around. It's great, but you know the scheme, right? We're going to outsmart you.
And with the defensive line picks too, I've actually not been big fans of it because, going back to the stats and everything, when you see physical athletes that have lack of production, like a Dominique Robinson, Jervon actually follows into that, and Zach Pickens, typically they do not pan out. What Jervon is doing is an outlier thing, being
Yes.
really good, and he deserves all the credit in the world for how he's transformed his body, how much effort he's putting in. Because actually, I think Yurko and like others have talked about this, where it's that whole Mike Tyson thing. Everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And the reason why those really good athletes at D line don't pan out is because as soon as they get hit, they're going to try and throw you, which at that case, typically, if you're not that great and you weren't able to really do that and have success at the NCAA level, you're not going to have that same success in the NFL level. And that's why you see them kind of really start to struggle at that NFL level. So, Jervon, to me, kudos to him, but typically you see them looking more like what Zach Pickens is right now, where Pickens just looks lost because he's like, I can't beat you with my athleticism. I didn't do that in college, and it still doesn't work here.
That third round pick should have been an offensive lineman instead of Zach Pickens. And so like you were saying about just pure analytics. Okay, I think the only guy I could really think of right now is like Max Crosby, who's a fourth round pick.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
very few guys that like, well, who Jared Allen might have been undrafted. But I mean,
Yeah.
you really have to like go search and do your homework to find guys that have gone in late rounds and panned out.
And most of the
at that
time,
position.
they're hustle guys. They're high energy
Yep.
guys. John Randall, Hall of Famer from the Vikings, undersized defensive tackles because he just never quit. He never got tired. Max Crosby never quits. He never gets tired. John, like you said, 69, who was
Jared Allen.
Jared Allen. Jared
Yeah.
Allen was a hustle and motor guy. It wasn't that they were like these physical freaks that kind of came out and just dominated everybody. It was because you had the same thing about him as the same thing that you say about a wide receiver who's drafted late. Well, Wes Welker is shifty, and Julian Edelman is shifty and quick. And Puka Nakua, he just kind of finds those zones, and right, like it's the same phrases. But that's why, to your point, Paulie, it's a waste of time when you do this shit with third round defensive tackles when you could go out and get a free. You just got Chris Williams from the Browns for a 7th round pick. Just do that in the future. Save those third round picks for offensive linemen.
Yeah.
And so then just moving up the ladder one step. And okay, so Ryan Poles deserves some criticism as well here, right? But the obvious thing that should have been done here today was to move on from the staff. At minimum, scapegoat the offensive coordinator. But really, you should have moved on from the staff in the last offseason. Now, it's obvious that you should do it. And to just sit there and waste more time till the end of the season is a waste. But part of me questions whether they'll even do it in the offseason moving forward. And so now you get into a conversation about ownership. And why? Well, we might be too cheap to keep a guy on the books while we hire another guy. And that is ownership interference that we're dealing with. And even though, and David, I know you're going to make a lot of points here probably, so I don't want to like kill it right as you get started, but
go for it.
I just hate this conversation because to me, it always feels like that cheap way out. Like when we said, hey, this is the best team a number 1 overall pick has ever stepped into, and we were all high on it during the offseason, we weren't crediting McCaskey's. We weren't that conversation doesn't exist until everything bombs and fails. And so we've gone like, I love the question, like you said, and I haven't really answered it, but the percentage of blame from bottom to top. And so, of course, things on the field could always be better. The coordinator's not doing them any justice. The head coach is responsible for enabling all this. The GM is responsible for putting all this supposed talent on there that isn't gelling, is built outside in, and it's just unorthodox. But now, at the end of the day, there is ultimately people up top that have to pay the price. And like I said, I mean, they don't have to pay the price. They won't. They're not going to sell the team. It's not going to change, which is why I find it to be a nuisance conversation. And I'm not going to have much more input on it than that. But Dave, we go back and forth on this all the time. I know you're pretty damn passionate about it starts at the top and it doesn't start at the bottom like I think it starts at the bottom.
I'll present to Brad kind of like what we've discussed in many, many episodes and all this stuff over time. But it's one of those chicken or the egg kind of problems, right? Where even yesterday we were arguing about this yesterday. Well, you can't blame the GM for not making moves if his bosses are strongly suggesting, wink wink, that we don't want to pay another coach, or that they're strongly suggesting that this is for the integrity of the Chicago Bears. Before you make any moves, Ryan, always think, is this good for the Bears? Because once you guess what, we're a history. When you're gone, they'll still be here, Ryan. So remember that before you make moves, because you can't convince me otherwise that George doesn't have some sort of influence over Ryan Poles long term. But the other part of it is what we've talked about is, you like other sports, Brad, the Cubs, once they sold from the Wrigley family to the Ricketts, you saw this massive overhaul. We used the Washington Commanders yesterday as an example. This is a team that is on the exact same timeline as the Bears were. And guess what happened? Bam, like instant success with a new ownership group that approaches things with modern ideas and modern philosophies. However, on the other hand, you have examples like the Texans where they just kind of hand the reins off to new GMs. They're kind of consistently successful. The TJ Watt or the JJ Watt years, the Deshaun Watson years, whatever that was worth to you, they were really successful at the time. Now they're back on a thing of success, right? So there are times, Jim Irsay, absolutely crazy, coked out, NFL owner. You got success there. You have a Super Bowl there. Why? In my mind, it's because he hires Bill Polian and he fucks off and does coke out of strippers' buttholes. Like, that's literally what he got arrested for. This guy is insane, but he leaves his team alone and then he just rides the success. And then you have your Jerry Joneses of the world, which is to me just the NFC's Jim Irsay, who loves to have his finger on the pulse of that team. So in these kinds of cases, to me, nothing will ever change until ownership changes. The Chicago Bulls and the White Sox will never be relevant as long as a Reinsdorf is at the top. We just have accepted that. And I think, to me, Paulie has almost talked me out of it because we have seen some moderate success growing with the Chicago Bears, and the McCaskies were there. So to his point, it's kind of one of those things where it's chicken or the egg. I have to agree with Paul because the evidence in his point is there. But now when it does revert, now it's kind of like, well, my point is coming back. The ownership is still kind of a problem. I don't know where you stand on that.
And just real quick, like, wasn't Reinsdorf there while the Bulls did win 6 championships?
Same thing. He fucked off. He got lucky with one guy.
Okay, and he still was there when the White Sox won in 2005, right? And so like you said, Jim Irsay was there when Bill Polian and Peyton Manning were there. So I get it. There's examples of being overcoming, and that's why I said, like, we're gonna really need Caleb to be a superstar.
Yeah,
but that's where I look at, like, Kevin Warren, because to me, hey, if I was a McCaskey right now, I wouldn't sell. I'd be like, hey, this is my team. My grandfather, great grandfather, whatever, like, built this team and everything like that. I'm looking at Kevin Warren going, wasn't your job to do that whole Arlington Heights thing, and it's still not there yet? But also, what are you supposed to do? Like, what else is he also supposed to be doing? Because if Kevin Warren got me hope, because I don't think you're really going to get rid of the McCaskies unless I've heard some other things, just because of, like, taxes because we all die when Virginia eventually kicks the bucket. I've heard that there's some weird tax things with that, but I still don't think that they're ever going to be selling ultimately and moving on from it. But this is where it's like Kevin Warren. Kevin Warren wants to do things different. And Kevin Warren seems like a no-nonsense guy. To me, I want to see him kind of go out there and lay the hammer down and be like, listen, this is not how we build winners. And then do that. And then they're like, hey, I'm sorry for that. We're going to be resuming this. And so to me, like, with that whole percentages, I actually put ownership at, like, the smallest. And then I actually put coaches and players equally, because DJ Moore, I see him just dogging it out there and, like, has the, he has the attitude of a 5-year-old child after he's not getting the ball, after he just signed this gigantic deal. He's not helping things and they're not executing. And so to me, it's players and coaches. And then it's like, then it's the GM, and then it's like small ownership, just because they're simply not executing. That's my take on it. Also, J2K, what's good? I saw you out there too.
Yeah, shout out to J2K, man. He's the best. did our whole branding for our channel, our logo, and everything like that.
Looks so cool.
We absolutely
job.
love J2K.
Yeah. I was cautiously excited as well, Brad, about Kevin Warren and the prospects of what he was going to do with this team. I think within like 6 to 10 months, I realized quickly that guy's here for one reason only, to head the development of a new stadium. And I think he has next to no input on football decisions. That's purely speculative, but when you just see, Ryan doing all the approach to re-signing DJ Moore, putting his cap guy in the room, and then giving it the presentation packet to Kevin Warren, and he flips through it quickly and goes like, "Looks good to me. He's a good player. He should stay here for a while." Like that's not a team president that's going like, "So hey, let's have like a full-on thing." This kind of goes back to what we started this with. What the fuck are you having 1.5 hour meetings for before your press conference? What are you garnering? Who's in that room? If Kevin Warren's in that room and George is in that room and all the coaches are in that room and Ryan Poles at the head of that table, who is saying anything of substance in this room that has any gravitas? Because there are too many goddamn cooks in this kitchen, first of all, right? When you have McCaskey interference, when you have Kevin Warren being this team president for what? I don't know what is his exact title. What is going on here exactly? I have a great quote for you guys. I saw this come across today. If I can,
And
just
real
read
quick,
this down.
David, just like meanwhile, John Gruden's getting up at 4 a.m. to like watch tape, right? That's what we're talking about here. You're taking an hour and a half to figure out your press conference. So, sorry, go ahead with the quote.
All right. We understand your frustration. We're frustrated too. It would be a natural reaction to just say, back up the truck and let's start a major overhaul. After a particularly disparaging loss, a season ticket holder told me, fire somebody. We deserve better than this. I get it. You deserve it, and your Bears deserve it to be winners. The decisions we announced today may not be the easiest or most popular, but we believe that they are the best decisions for the Chicago Bears. You guys want to take a guess who said that, when, why, what?
George McCaskey in what, year one of Flus?
George McCaskey said that when they retained Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy for the lame duck year over the summer. It sounds
great job,
eerily
David.
similar, right? It sounds eerily similar. And this is why you want to, like, Paulie, I'm never going to try to convince you, because part of our fun thing is that we just bust each other's balls and yell at each other sometimes.
Always try and convince me. I'm open to change.
Yeah, but what the it is when you talk about that isn't a Kevin Warren quote. That isn't a Ryan Poles quote. That isn't a Matt Eberflus quote. That is a George McCaskey in regards to why they kept Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy going into the season where they drafted Justin Fields. Everybody knew back then the writing was on the wall. It is completely pointless. It is a complete waste of time. You should rebuild and restructure and do all these things. And you let Bruce Arians walk out the fucking door, and you let Chris Ballard tell you to go fuck yourself because he wanted to trade Jay Cutler, and you said, not on my watch. So when you say, yeah, you can't blame ownership, we're talking about fundamental direction changing decisions of a franchise that are stopped by one man and one man only, or whoever that one man and his underlings are. They're complete yes men, and they have zero concept of not repeating your mistakes. They keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I never really liked that definition of insanity. I think it's like a good cliche, but it's not necessarily. This is fucking stupid. This isn't crazy. You're just stupid. You just don't get it. You're doing the same thing over and over, and it applies 4 years later, and you can see it. You don't need to observe a team from far away. It happened in your own fucking building, and you're doing it again.
So I know we've gone a little bit over our time limit, and I know Brad's got to go. By the way, everybody in chat, Brad's got his A22 film breakdown that he's going to be doing after this show. So make sure you go check out Unbearable Sports, and make sure you go and check out his content. And, I'll just say it again. Like I said, when we were saying this is the best team and number one overall pick has come into, we weren't crediting him. But I love what Brad said. I still put blame on the ownership. The percentage of it may not be as high as you do, David. I'm not saying they're not to blame. They are. It's just ultimately, I think there are other things that could be fixed a lot easier than McCaskey selling the team. Brad, I don't know. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I guess closing thoughts. It's like I've said, like what I started the show with, I am not a big fire the coach type of guy, but right now I am because I think that that is the best thing because when your team is giving up and you've already had 2 players only meetings as well or like player meetings to come to the coaches and talk to them, that's where they've tried everything. And if they've tried everything, sometimes like there was an old person I used to work with that said, if someone disagrees with you, did you try convincing them once? Didn't work? Did you try it again? All right. Well, some people don't want to change. And sometimes with that, you just kind of have to move on. And to me, it's one of those you just have to move on. You just have to go through it because when they're in those rooms, they're not going to want to take to coaching until they know that things are moving forward because they know everyone sees the writing on the walls. They know they're not going to be there.
Yeah.
So,
I had a great teacher once go to the chalkboard and he drew 6 sideways. And he asked, "Is this a 6 or is this a 9?" He's like, "Depends which way you want to turn it."
yeah.
He's like, "But understand, if I'm passionately arguing with you that it's a 9 and you're passionately arguing with me that it's a 6, I truly believe what I'm saying and you truly believe what you're saying. And you ultimately have to have respect for that." Dave, any closing thoughts?
George McCaskey's a fucking bitch.
Love it. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us in chat. That's the best closing thought
We can't top that.
Fucking A, dude. Guys, thank you so much. Once again, Unbearable Sports. Let's go check out his A22 film breakdown. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, especially in this unbearable week of Bears football. So thanks, guys.
See you, boys.